nations, through to the very practical aspects of how Australia and the United States, as defence partners particularly, can work together to achieve our common goals, both globally and in the region. In particular, we have reaffirmed our joint commitment to the force posture initiatives in Northern Australia as a tangible contribution to the stability, the security and the prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region. We look forward to continuing to work together on the development of those force posture initiatives and indeed to engaging with a number of our regional neighbours in that context. As I said, both at the Shangri-La Dialogue, which Secretary Mattis and I attended on the weekend, and also here today, countering the threat of violent extremism is very much at the front of our minds. The attacks that have occurred in recent days and weeks around the world are further reminders, as if that were needed, of the new reality in which we live. And during today's AUSMIN meeting, we strengthened our resolve to defeat those who wish us harm. We are both committed to defeating Daesh in Iraq and in Syria and to preventing its spread around the world, including in the Indo-Pacific region. For us, that means addressing the prospects of returning foreign fighters, if that happens, and also in the Australian context, our whole-of-government actions to deal with broader counter-terrorism issues. As Secretary Tillerson has said, we reaffirmed our condemnation of North Korea's ongoing provocations, which pose a grave threat to both global and regional security. We are committed to working very closely together and with our regional partners to impose greater costs on the regime for that destabilising behaviour. This AUSMIN meeting has been a great opportunity to build upon our already close working relationship with the new US administration. We have met in other international locations in the United States, and I really want to thank both Secretary Mattis and Secretary Tillerson for travelling to Sydney to join us here today, and we look forward to continuing productive discussions.
Secretary Mattis.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. As you've already heard, we stand here before you representing the strongest possible military alliance. This is one that has stood together through thick and thin and through generations. And I would just say that Australia has also proven to be a friend that tells us what we need to hear, not necessarily what we want to hear. And it was heartening today to find that we again share an appreciation of the security situation, both regionally and worldwide. The danger that we have faced over many, many years has built a sense of respect between our forces. I would remind you that after 9/11, when thousands of innocent people were murdered in America, including Australians, it was the Australians that were first to join us in the desert of Afghanistan in those uncertain days after 9/11, and we remain grateful for Australia's alliance with us. Today, we still stand together in that fight, and certainly our sympathies, our respects with the people of London, of Marawi, Philippines, of Kabul, Afghanistan, of Cairo, Egypt, the list goes on, Jakarta, and we stand together. We do not allow ourselves to be intimidated at all. Australia, as always, punching above its weight in defense of our values and freedom. And these are values and freedoms that we intend to pass on to the next generation intact, and we are committed again today to assessing how we are going to work together to do so. I would add that your 2016 Defense White Paper, we have reviewed it in Washington, and it's a model for other nations coming to grips with today's security challenges, and I am confident that it's a blueprint for keeping the Australian forces at the top of their game. We believe that our Australian-American partnership is a foundation for stability and peace, not only in this region, but more broadly. And we are going to ensure between our forces that our diplomats' voices are always backed up by skillful, by ethical, and by fierce force of arms. But thank you very much. We look forward to your questions.
Secretary Mattis, you have flagged a different strategy, a different tactic, I should say, in the fight against ISIS, one annihilation, which, among other things, talk through for us what the practical endpoint of that tactic is? Are we talking about going into these areas and systematically killing people who may pose a future threat? What happens if that involves a greater risk to civilian casualties or some other unforeseen outcome which will complicate the military tactics? We've always been told that you can't bomb an ideology into submission. Are you concerned with all that? By focusing on the individuals, you might inadvertently strengthen the ideology. And just for the Australian side, could you tell us, please, either Minister Bishop or Payne, what Australia's view of this new tactic is? What does it mean for our involvement, our military involvement in the Middle East? Does it mean we change our rules of engagement or other current rules?
Well, the President Trump, when he came into office, wanted an accelerated campaign against the enemy. This is an enemy against all civilization. It's a reason there are 66 nations that have joined the campaign, besides the Arab League, the European Union, the Interpol, and NATO. And in this campaign, where before we were shoving them from one town to another and they're falling back, we now take the time to invest the town and make certain the foreign fighters cannot escape to return to Paris, France, to Australia, to wherever they came from, and bring their message of hatred and their skills back to those places and attack innocent people. But I would also add that in the midst of all this, we have changed not one bit of our rules of engagement. We have relented not one bit in terms of trying to do everything humanly possible to protect the innocent on the battlefield, because the battlefield, the way the enemy has chosen to fight, is also a humanitarian field from our point of view. It is the ISIS that forces innocent people to stay where they choose to fortify. So our intent is to do everything possible to keep them alive, to protect them, but at the same time, we're going to have to take that caliphate down, or the attacks that you've seen going on around the world that you all have reported on will continue. This is not the end state. The end state is where we work together for reconciliation, for what the diplomats will have to do, but clearly the enemy has got to be taken out by military means where they are powerful enough to cause these attacks on others. And we can't sit idly by and let them hold it. I think that answers your question.
The Australian government has made it clear that any Australian citizen that supports in any way terrorist organisations such as ISIS or Al-Qaeda or any of their franchises is breaking Australian law, and if they seek to travel to conflict zones in the Middle East, in Iraq and Syria, then not only are they breaking Australian law, they're putting their own lives at risk, as well as adding to the misery and suffering of the people of Iraq and Syria. We have coalition forces supporting, advising, assisting Iraqi security forces and others, and they are essentially fighting against the coalition if they continue to support terrorism. Should they survive and seek to return to Australia, they will be monitored, they will be tracked, and they will be subjected to the Australian laws should they return to Australia. I'll ask Senator Payne to add to that.
Thank you very much, and David, thank you for the question. We absolutely support the approach that the international coalition led by the United States is taking. Our absolute preference is, as far as possible, to ensure that those who have left their countries to fight in the name of Daesh or ISIS in the Middle East are not able to return to those countries and perpetrate any of their atrocities in those areas. So as far as possible, if we can ensure that, that is our preference. However, we have to be prepared to deal with the eventuality that if returning foreign fighters, if that arises. We would be negligent if we did not turn our attention to that, as the Foreign Minister has said, under Australian law and under preparations that we have made during recent months, in fact the last year. We will use all the force of Australian law to deal with those people. Importantly, however, one of the things that we have also discussed today is the challenge that this faces for other countries in our region. For Indonesia, for Malaysia, for Singapore, for the Philippines, and so on. And In the context of that discussion, we have indicated to our counterparts, both individually and over the weekend at Shangri-La, that we will support them in their efforts to address the prospect of returning fighters as well. They are. We have the world's most populous Muslim nation to our north. President Widodo and his cabinet exemplify a sensible and moderate approach in Islamic terms, in our neighbourhood. Similarly, Malaysia, similarly the Muslim communities of a number of those other countries in our region. We need to be able to engage with them in a constructive way and make sure that where possible we assist and provide tools that enable them to challenge this threat too.
Garvin Harris from the New York Times. Secretary Tillerson, the Australians have spent years of diplomatic effort negotiating pacts to address their deep concerns over trade and climate, but the Trump administration tossed those pacts aside. Now, after rejecting their priorities and work, you're here asking Australians to make specific and concrete sacrifices for your priorities in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and North Korea. What specific promises have you brought on trade and climate to ensure that Australians do not interpret America first to mean America the selfish, America the boorish, or America the go it alone? And for the Australians, Mr. Trump yelled at Prime Minister Turnbull in their first conversation. He pushed aside the Montenegrin Prime Minister at a NATO meeting. He launched a Twitter attack on Germany, one of the U.S.'s closest allies. He just insulted the mayor of London after a terror attack on that city. Do these tactics give you pause in your efforts to improve relations with the U.S., or do the President's words and behavior not matter in international relations?
Are you sure you don't have more?
I think that'll do.
Okay. The fact that the Trump administration has examined agreements that were entered into by the prior administration, but never taken to the American people or taken to our own Congress to get an assessment of their view of those agreements, does not define the trading relationships between the United States and Australia, nor other relationships on issues that are of mutual importance. Climate change, certainly national security issues, as you have heard expressed today. We have very strong trading relationships with Australia today. I think if you look at the total of foreign direct investment by the United States in Australia, as well as our actual trade, we are the largest trading partner by those two measures with Australia. My expectation is that's not going to change, and we look forward to continued strengthening of those relationships on trade with Australia, already a very important trading partner. I think the President's decision to exit the climate accord, again, was his judgment that that agreement did not serve the American people well. It did not serve their future economic interest either. But I think the President indicating his desire to re-examine, enter into discussions with others, perhaps a new construct of an agreement, indicates his recognition that the issue is still important and that he wants to stay engaged on the issue. He's not walking away from it. He's simply walking away what he felt was an agreement that did not serve the American people well. So again, I think in our relationship with Australia, we will continue to have shared interest in addressing these daunting challenges that face us all. And so that, I think, is how we see the relationship going forward. And there are so many other areas of such strong mutual interest and cooperation that there's no doubt that we will continue to address the two issues that you raise in a very cooperative way.
I should point out that Australia has its own views on our priorities, our interests. As it happens, they align so often with those of the United States. We have a similar worldview, we have shared values, shared interests, but Australia always takes our own national interest into account when we, for example, respond to the terrorist threat that is so evident in Iraq and Syria. We take our own interests into account when we're dealing with regional threats and risks like the behaviour of North Korea. We see North Korea as a threat to our region as much as we see it as a threat globally. And we certainly are absolutely aligned with the United States in supporting the rules-based order, and we make up our own mind about when Australia should act, when Australia should be involved in defence and security operations. As it happens, the United States and Australia share similar views. In relation to Twitter, I understand that it has a maximum of 140 characters. So we deal with the President, with his Cabinet and with the US administration on what they do, what they achieve, what their strategies are, and how we can work together in close and deep cooperation to uphold that international rules-based order and to bring peace, stability and prosperity to our part of the world, as the United States has guaranteed and assured for the last 70 years. In relation to the Paris Agreement, Australia took a decision in August of 2015 that we would put forward targets in accordance with the Paris Agreement that were environmentally and economically sound for Australia. And we will continue to, I believe, meet our targets under the Paris Agreement. But again, it was a decision taken by our Cabinet in the interests of our economy and our citizens. And I believe that through meeting our targets, environmentally and economically sustainable measures, we will be on the path to ensuring affordable, reliable, low emissions energy for the Australian people. But we certainly appreciate the United States' innovation and ingenuity that allows us to embrace the technologies and the innovative approaches that the United States brings to the area of environmental and energy policy.
Greg Jennett from the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. I direct this primarily at the visiting secretaries, and it's somewhat broader than Gardner's question. Can you explain or reconcile to Australian audiences an apparent contradiction in the administration? Your business here today is to build alliances and relationships, and at least there is an impression abroad of isolationism expressed, some would argue, through the climate change decision or even through statements made by the executive at the NATO gathering. So, Secretary Tillerson, do you acknowledge that there are in this region pockets of doubt about US consistency, and what do you do to address them? And Secretary Mattis, you do seem to have convinced the Australian Prime Minister, at least on matters relating to the South China Sea, made comments in Singapore about finding new sources of leadership to help the United States. So the question is, what forms of leadership relating to the South China Sea do you seek from Australia?
Well, first, let me respond in terms of those concerns. That's why we're here. That's why we travel to the region. That's why we engage with our counterparts. I've had 2 direct engagements already with members of ASEAN in Washington, D.C. We're going to be very active in the East Asia Conference, also in APEC. The President's already indicated he intends to participate. So in terms of addressing those concerns, this is how we address it, is to travel to the region, to meet with our counterparts, and to talk about all the issues that are important to them and hear from them concerns they may have about where the administration is positioned relative to whether it be security issues or economic and trade issues. And we have had very good dialogue in all of those contacts. So I hope the fact that we are here demonstrates that that is certainly not this administration's view or intention to somehow put at arm's length the other important allies and partners in the world.
As far as your question, what form of leadership are we looking for from Australia? I would put it in traditional Australian terms. It's adherence to international law. It's the normal leadership by example that Australia has demonstrated over really since its founding as a modern nation. It's the sort of thing where people work together to solve problems, where we sit down and define problems and then look at what are the rules of the road, and then we abide by them. It's a matter of finding common cause and then finding a way to address everyone's interests in the most productive manner possible. And Australia has proven its ability to do this, to be a beacon of hope for people in the world. I would add to be a contributor to security in the region, to stability in the region, from the Solomon Islands effort a few years ago to all the other humanitarian operations that they've been engaged in. It's mostly a matter of leadership by example would be the short answer to your question.
Thank you, Bob Burns, Associated Press. A question for Secretaries Tillerson and Mattis, something that's unfolded today while you were here in the discussions, which is that the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt have announced they're cutting diplomatic ties with Qatar. And I wonder if you could explain what you believe are the implications of this for the fight against Islamic extremism and also for solidarity in the coalition against Iran. And if I could also ask you about something that's related to the Central Command region, among all four of you, which is Afghanistan, which you all mentioned. Secretary Tillerson, has the administration reviewed options for how to turn things around in Afghanistan? What is your view on the wisdom of committing more U.S. troops and other resources to a conflict that has been stalemated for years? And I'd like to ask the same question of Secretary Mattis. And for your Australian counterparts, you said that you're willing to contribute more troops in Afghanistan. I think you've been quoted as saying perhaps 30. And I'm wondering whether you would consider going beyond that in other ways in which you could increase your contributions in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Well, let me just make a brief comment on the late breaking news that you just referred to in terms of diplomatic relations between GCC countries and Qatar. I think, as I understand it, from what little bit I've read since the actions were taken, I think what we're witnessing is a growing list of some irritants in the region that have been there for some time. And obviously they have now bubbled up to a level that countries decided they needed to take action in an effort to have those differences addressed. We certainly would encourage the parties to sit down together and address these differences. And if there's any role that we can play in terms of helping them address those, we think it is important that the GCC remain unified. I do not expect that this will have any significant impact, if any impact at all, on the unified fight against terrorism in the region or globally. All of those parties you mentioned have been quite unified in the fight against terrorism and the fight against Daesh, ISIS, and have expressed that most recently in the summit in Riyadh. As to the Afghanistan policy, which is still under development and review, so there is no conclusion, and I will leave it to Secretary Mattis to answer more directly what the military plans are for this year to stabilize Afghanistan. I think clearly, though, what we do understand is we can never allow Afghanistan to become a platform for terrorism to operate from. And so our commitment to Afghanistan is to ensure that it never becomes a safe haven for terrorists to launch attacks against the civilized world or against any other part of the world or any of their neighbors. And so this is really a question of what is the end state and how do we reach that end state? And that's part of the policy review that is still under development. So I don't want to go further than I would say the thinking currently in the administration is. But other than to say we are committed to ensuring Afghanistan does not become that platform from which terrorist activities can be launched. And let me turn it to Secretary Mattis to respond.
Yeah, Bob, in regards to the implications for the counter-ISIS fight, I am confident there will be no implications coming out of this diplomatic situation at all. And I say that based on the commitment that each of these nations that you just referred to have made to this fight. As far as the situation vis-a-vis Iran, I believe Iran's actions speak louder than anyone's words, and they are going to incite the international community in that region to try to block them in the various destabilizing efforts they are undertaking right now, from Syria, where Assad remains in power today because of Iran's actions, to Yemen, where they have been contributing in an unhelpful way to a war that is marooning millions of people and leaving them vulnerable to starvation and health problems and violence. So I think it's Iran's actions that will speak most loudly, and the diplomatic situation, it will probably take some time. I don't know how long, but it will be resolved. As far as Afghanistan goes, as Secretary Tillerson said, the policy is under review, but at the same time, we're up against an enemy that knows that they cannot win at the ballot box. And you think we have to sometimes remind ourselves of that reality. That's why they use bombs, because ballots would ensure they never had a role to play. And based upon that foundation, that they cannot win the support, the affection, the respect of the Afghan people, we will stand by them. It's been a long, hard fight. Australia has been in this one from the very beginning, and the fight goes on. But the bottom line is we're not going to surrender civilization to people who cannot win at the ballot box. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think Jim put that particularly well, if I might say, at the end there. Australia does currently have 270 personnel, both embeds in the NATO mission and trainers, particularly at Karga at the Afghan National Officer Academy. And that is, from our perspective, the continuation of our longest contribution to any military campaign in Australia's history. So we regard it as a very significant one. And I want to acknowledge and pay tribute to the Australian men and women of the ADF who are in Afghanistan now, dealing with, no matter what their task is, what is a very complex security environment, as we have seen evidenced again in the last few days. They continue a contribution of which we are very proud. In terms of the enhancement of that contribution of 30 personnel, as you indicated, that is in general accord with the nature of the request that we received from NATO, which was indeed supported by the United States. And we are very comfortable with that. As a nation, we make the second largest non-NATO contribution to the effort in Afghanistan, and we are in the top 10 financial contributors to Afghanistan through the Afghan National Trust Fund. So these are a strong indication of Australia's preparedness to be engaged in what is an ongoing international fight against violent extremists and against terrorists. I agree completely with Jim. They can't win a ballot, so they use weapons to try and fight their way out. That's not something we are ever prepared to see take hold in Afghanistan again. As Secretary Tillerson also said, we can never allow it to be a platform for terrorism as it was in the past. We'll continue to make that contribution. It's why we made the announcement that we made last week. As the United States and the NATO support mission develop their approach, we will engage in those discussions as we always do. And we will we'll make our own views known, play our part, and any further decisions are a matter for consideration at that time.
A question to Secretary Tillerson. I actually asked you what your view was on the wisdom of adding more U.S. troops and resources to Afghanistan. I'm aware of the fact that the policy is under review, but what is your view on that?
I would reserve my answer until the policy review is completed. It needs to be thought of in that context.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.